Welcome to the Staff in Trenchcoat. I'm Raymond Magdallan, here as always with my co-host Pope Jupiter.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about Witch King by Martha Wells. And I know that you did not like the book, so we'll just jump right in. Shit on this book.
Yeah, so I'd say I got blue balls by this, but it just left me flaccid the entire time.
Thumbing in a softie, the
Yeah,
novel.
pushing rope the whole time. Yeah, it was.
Pushing rope.
You never heard that?
No.
Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, for one thing, this is sort of an act one.
So it is a series.
Right. Um, and that's fine, but I'd like more story in this book rather than just setting up whatever is going to happen in the rest of the series, which I'm not going to read, so I'm never going to find out. But
Well, what do you think that she was trying to set up? I didn't get that impression. It seemed like the narrative kind of came to a close. Everything was answered. I mean, there was the implication that there was going to be future endeavors with trying to enhance the position of the rising world.
yeah,
But I mean, we find out.
So the reason why I would describe this as an act one is that I feel like we met the principal characters, we set the stage, and the conflict is trying to restore the rising world to whatever it was Bashasar wanted it to be.
Well, I guess I would. That's the meta narrative for sure. But I mean, the plot arc of the book is much more, at least to me, read like a search and rescue.
Yeah.
We gotta find my wife.
Getting the band back together.
But
Yeah.
all right, so it was an act one. You didn't like that.
Yeah, it was act one. And yes, there was a definite arc. I felt like I did all that 5 years ago was such a cop out attempt at the fucking Watchmen leverage ending that I couldn't believe it was in a serious book. Which it makes sense that he would have made those plans ahead of time. He's a fucking immortal demon who
Like vaguely immortal.
yeah,
It wasn't made clear if they actually are, because it makes reference to they have bodies in the underearth
but he lost his, but he's still around.
or something, and there was talk of war
Yeah.
down there. So conceivably, maybe it's like a Tolkien elf situation where they're like some species of like sea creature where
They don't die, but they can be killed. Yeah. That would make sense. Especially since there are a couple of references where they say demons don't really make war like humans do, where we fight each other over territory like this. So, I mean, it would make sense that there would be some sort of conflicts, but just to thin the population, if nothing else.
So you didn't dig the main character either.
I disliked him least of all. I actually thought he was pretty well. I don't know how much of this, again, I kind of had this discussion with you, how much of this was the narrator and how much of this was the text. Because Kai came across as very aloof in what I listened to. I don't know how much that came across in the text, but part of it was that he kind of used the same narration voice for the rest of the text as for Kai's voice, whereas he somewhat did voices for the other characters.
Oh, okay. You mean actually in the Audible?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I didn't get that as much, but I could see where it would feel like Kai is both the main character and the storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't dislike Kai. I didn't feel like we really got to know any of the other characters. I did feel a little wrong-footed by Zeddy, because I kind of felt when she was first introduced, she was this kind of helpless girl, and my first impression in that first chapter was that she was like the kid sister, and then we meet her in the flashback, and she's this badass witch character, and I'm just like, wait,
Well, Sanja was supposed to fit that role, right? The helpless girl, kid sister archetype,
I'm trying to remember who the fuck Sanjay is.
right from the very beginning of the text. She is the girl that was brought to be a
Right,
vessel.
right, yes. Yeah. Yeah, now I remember her. She's the one who was with the person who Kai ended up taking their body.
Yes.
And yeah, other than Kai was fine. The whole thing with Dehim, I think the brother of Tyron.
Is that how they said it in the Audible? Was to him?
Yeah,
Okay. I read it Dahim.
Dahim. Okay. He was like when they get to the immortal halls or whatever the fuck they were called, and they find him there. I was like, so he's gonna betray them, right? Like that just put my antenna up. But apparently he was fine, and there was no he was not. He was just looking for the stones or whatever.
Well, I take the opposite view from you. I really enjoyed the book, but she did do what I would consider to be the way you fail, the betrayal turn, which is she brings in that character whose name I'm blanking on. That's going to be a hallmark of our discussion today. Is the names were crazy. Ramad. A lot of time was spent with the characters being like, I bet he's going to betray us. And you kind of just know that that's what's going to happen. And then he does at the end.
See,
and
I actually was taken in that he was legit. And
okay, then I'm wrong.
I didn't see that he was a double agent.
All right, well then I am factually wrong. Then I guess that is she did it that is the correct way.
The
set
double
up
subversion.
The betrayal. Yeah, she got you.
Yeah, she got me.
Well, because you sent me a message, and you seemed more disenchanted with this book than any of the others that we've done. And I think you even said this might be the worst book that we've covered.
I don't know if it's the worst book. Again, there's some there is some good. There's just not enough of it. Like it's that absence of good versus presence of bad.
Okay.
I just think there's just not enough good stuff here.
And you didn't like the writing style.
No, the writing style was fine. I might have expressed some frustration with the back and forth timeline stuff, but no, it was fine.
Yeah, I was not a fan of her attempt to interweave those two storylines.
Yeah, especially since it mostly seemed to serve to provide a little bit of context to the present day sections.
Right.
Which was nice, but
it was a little bloaty.
Yeah.
For sure. I liked her narrative style, and I thought that the main character, at least for the first 40 to 60% of the novel, I thought that a lot of the interplay between the demons and the witches and so on and so forth, that it was engaging. And just generally speaking, I thought it was a fairly easy book to read. I don't know if I would put it at the top of the list. I think it definitely was more enjoyable than the 5th season.
Yeah. I commented to you earlier about this, that once I started listening to it, or once I would start listening to it, I would enjoy listening to it, and I wouldn't necessarily want to put it down, metaphorically speaking. But when it would be at that point where I'd be looking to listen to it, like I'd be looking for something to put on or in my car or whatever, I'd be like, oh, do I really want to listen to this? And I believe I commented that it felt like gotta take my medicine and listen to this, which is not how this project should be. This is a fun.
And it hasn't been that way.
It has not
For
been that
previous
way
books?
for previous books, and maybe I just needed to bitch about it because after that it just kind of came easy to finish it.
Okay.
So
Well, not as hard line of a take as I was anticipating.
no,
So let's just jump into it then. Gender and sexuality. You mentioned before we started recording that was a topic that you thought there was ample.
I wouldn't go so far as to say ample, but I do think that I guess it's mostly just kind of something that you don't really see, that I haven't seen a lot in media, and especially it not really being commented on, is the fact that Kai is a man, is male, uses male pronouns, however you want to define that with demons, regardless of what body he's in.
Right.
And then there's the bit towards the end where there's the military, I think it was the Ariki, that are traditionally women, but it's a bunch of men standing there, and he comments whether they either were recently forced into fighting or recently had their genders changed. It was really, it had the air to me of someone who is trying to, by force of example, show how gender should be treated. Like, it's, I don't want to quite say a costume because there are problems with calling gender a costume like that, but in a much more serious and less flippant way, that is kind of how.
Well, it was fluid.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Fluid, that's a better word than a costume. Yeah.
Yeah, I also thought that the treatment of gender was interesting. And you had Baked Ziti, who, her wife was, what was the character's name?
I don't remember. I don't even remember that character's wife. I'm sure she was important because there were a couple of characters like
Taran?
No, Taran was Kai's wife.
No.
Yes.
No. To the Google!
Yeah, I'm like 99% sure.
I challenge you.
Because doesn't he...
All right. Taran Stargard, an immortal marshal of the Blessed Lands called the Fallen. It doesn't even give us the...
Yeah. I'm like 99% sure, like...
No,
the
I...
end of the first or second chapter in the present ends with Kai, like, ripping into someone and being like, "Where is my wife?"
No, that's... here, I even have the quote. She planted her hands on her hips and focused on Asham and Ramad. She said, "Let's start the way we mean to go on. Whose skin am I going to peel off until someone tells me where my wife is?"
Oh.
And that is Ziti.
Okay. I could have sworn...
No, Kai doesn't have a wife.
Okay. That kind of changes things. My interpretation of things. I completely misunderstood that.
And and as far as I could tell, Taran, whatever, is not like a demon.
No, they're...
So it is just, they're just lesbians. And again, it is executed in a way that I think is good in the sense that she just writes it.
Yeah. There's no commenting on it. There's
Nope,
no...
it just is what it is. It is normalized.
Yeah.
In that way, and I think that is laudable and enjoyable.
Right.
I assume if you got some, chuds entering the chat, they might be like, "Why are you gonna make my story political?" But I think this does the opposite of that.
It's not political as long as both women are hot.
Oh, okay. Is that the standard?
Yeah.
But I mean, as much as you can, it's sort of it's anti-political in the sense that it is just treated as a matter of course.
Yeah, it is. it's sort of a bold political statement by not being bold at all.
And I agree with you. I enjoyed the way that Kai in different bodies functioned,
Mm-hmm.
and he would describe the sensations of existing in one body or another, and I thought that it was well written, well executed.
Yeah.
Martha Wells is obviously a skilled writer. One thing I have seen in reviews is people saying it's not as good as other more notable texts that she has written. Although I'm not sure if that is a function of the actual quality or if it is more a genre change. I don't know if she's really known for writing fantasy adventure. Because I guess that's what I would put this in categorically. Is I don't know if I would call it high fantasy. I think I would push it more towards an adventure story.
Yeah, I agree. The magic is there, and we'll get to that when we get to the magic system. And I do think there is some interesting discussions of magic, but again, it's just sort of in the text. It's not commented on. It's not.
It's kind of an ungrounded situation with the magic where it is treated in the same way as gender, just sort of as a matter of course. There's not really a whole lot of information given.
Right.
There are a couple info dumps, but other than that, she seemed to want to just kind of integrate the magic into the mystique of the world.
Right.
But before we get there, though, does it fuck?
No.
It does not. And I thought maybe this was the book that I had selected that we then found out did not have an Audible yet. I was expecting a fantasy pirate story with romance elements. I did not get that.
No.
This was not that. And so I was hoping that there was going to be some romance to it, and there really wasn't. I mean, Bake Ziti and her wife, there was some, obvious romantic love involved there
Yeah.
with, the themes of, reuniting and loyalty and so on and so forth. But there really wasn't, the book needed some lust. I think, new rule. If your book contains decapitation, grotesque violence, body swapping, so on and so forth, and it's geared towards an adult audience, you lose something of the relatability of the text when you're trying to set up these relationships, but the entire narrative is sexless.
Right.
And I do think that this narrative suffered from that to some degree.
Right.
And you are sort of left wondering if Kai, and by extension the demons, are sort of these sexless beings that only ever just inhabit a body, but they never really experience what it is to be alive.
Right.
And I think the story could have been enhanced, definitely.
I think one thing we kind of discussed in our pre-show discussion was how there didn't really seem to be much of a political through line, which there kind of seemed like some progressive elements to the origins of the rising world and this and that were corrupted. I tend to agree. I think a more interesting story would have just been an exploration of the demons. And like you mentioned in After the Revolution, that as good and interesting as that book was, you spent most of the book just wanting the story of the revolution. Yeah. Like that was the more interesting story contained in this book. I think that a more interesting story would have been the origins of the demons and the Soretti. That how that came to be, or the actual Rising World origin war. Because we get the beginning, and we kind of get hints of the end of that conflict, the beginning.
Right. Well, we get a little bit of like the hierarch genocide.
Yeah.
That happens. But it's all mostly off stage.
Right. Everything seems to happen off stage. It's except for there's a couple of fight scenes, but I just keep going back to the scene near the end where he pulls the Ozymandias. Oh, I already enacted that plan 5 years ago, and it's like, why is this scene happening on a fucking raft?
There's a lot of there's a lot of all right. We're riding on a boat.
Yeah.
Now we're riding on a fake boat. Now we're in a barge.
Now we're on a sky ship.
Now we're on a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Or what do they call them? Wall walkers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. Enough that it was kind of humorous as I was reading it. I was like, okay, we're doing another boat transport scene.
Yeah, and I mean, the book didn't have a lot of deliberate comedy. I mean, it was a pretty self-serious book.
I don't know. I did get. It seems like maybe as we're discussing it, our roles are reversing here because now that the more I'm talking about it, I'm like, hey, maybe I didn't like it. Because there was a lot of stuff that happened that I thought was really clown car. When he, for example, he kills the hierarchs, but he just like makes water. Or for example, he kills that one hierarch and there's no mention at all of anything about needing their head or
Mm-hmm.
any kind of violence that is of that degree. And then it's just one line where it's just like, and then I found a dagger and sawed his head off.
I do remember that part. Yeah, that was.
So maybe clown car is not fair, but there were some moments of really strange jumps from levels of violence or methods, and then a lot of the climactic fighting scenes kind of just boil down to he just gets mad and does something that he hasn't done or that isn't prepared in the rest of the book. Or there'll just be a revelation of, oh, well, this is the way this works. Like, they're in this incredibly nasty, broken down ass city, and yet one of the enemies happens to find one drop of Bake Ziti's blood.
Yeah.
And then, even though there's no mention of it in the entire text, all of a sudden it's, you forgot that blood magic exists, even though I never mentioned it. And so, therefore, this.
Well, except that she got it because she used blood and spit as part of the ritual, didn't she?
Oh, no, it was set up in terms of, like, mechanically.
Oh.
But you were never. But you were never given any impression that that was a thing in the narrative universe.
Right.
And again, given that you're dealing with people that are functionally immortal, in retrospect, it seems like an almost unbelievably careless thing to do. But then also, it's like, what are the chances that she would find that blood?
Yeah,
Give me a break.
That was my thing. I was like, are you...
Or the amalgams, where he kills them off by just using, like, extendo rod. That was lame as fuck.
Yeah.
And that particular item gets used several times in the text, and it just, I mean, it almost functions like a lightsaber. It seems like it's something that's like a foot long or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then it shoots out with enough force to just like crush through the carapace of a monster. I don't know. I would have just gone with like a fireball, or some other more traditional fantasy combat, or a sword even.
Or again, just, he's this weird demon executor. What the hell?
He's the fourth prince of some.
No, the body he inhabited.
Oh, expositor.
Expositor, that's what they were called.
Which that's just a word that means one who gives great information, or...
Yeah, I took it as part of we don't call our mages mages, we call them expositors. It's just another fancy word, like,
Yeah, I hated it.
yeah. He inhabited the body of an expositor, which was sort of implied to change even his demon physiology, or was that because he inhabited a body that wasn't prepared for him?
You mean in terms of like then he suddenly could do expositor magic?
Yeah, and he
I
like
think that
lost
just
his
seemed
dark
like
vision.
it was the right.
You know, he lost his night vision, and
Yeah, and then does at one point he steals somebody's eyeballs, right? And just
yeah,
and again it was like okay, it's just a little bit weird.
yeah,
Um, the expositor thing where and again then he sort of discovers that I can just use my own pain as a deus ex machina
yeah.
to do magic.
Do we just fully move into the magic system discussion now?
Yeah, let's hit it. Let's
So,
hit it.
I actually didn't mind that so much because it kind of one issue I've always had with magic systems is when they make a magic system that it is clear it was designed by someone in our world. And by that I mean something like the Harry Potter world, where if you use the wrong syllable to cast the spell, you get a completely different spell. Now, why the fuck do the Latin words I use matter for this eldritch force of creation? And it's fine if magic is a human creation.
No, I mean you're cooking. I'm
but
right there with you. Magic words are lame.
yeah. So I like this idea that the expositors and the hierarch or hierarchy have a way of using magic, but basically it's just a way of like focusing power, and they've concentrated that power in these certain wells. But Kai figures out a way to tap into the same sort of power source, but not like corrupted the way they. I appreciated that they made it so that magic is not this rigid man designed thing where you have to do things in a specific way or you get a bad outcome or what have you. I liked that the way they did it was that it's basically a mixture of will and knowledge, because it's clear that he needed a certain amount of will to be able to use this power, but he also needed the knowledge to create the intentions. The magic system seemed a little underbaked.
Well, the word magic only appears once in the text,
Right.
as far as I could tell. And it's one character asking another if an item requires some specific magic to work. And I thought that was really strange. You know how I feel about, just like using replacement words. Typically, that's not my jam.
Right.
And there was a lot of that. I could get behind the intention as a word for spell. I think that's clever. The expositor did not seem like those characters, that archetype embodied the word in a way that made any sense to me. It was a strange choice. And
It definitely had the feel of, well, this sounds like if you think about words like Hierophant or Magister or what have you, these are words that have been used for magic users like that. It kind of has the same ring to it, but obviously it doesn't mean anything close to the.
and then there was the third wrinkle of the witches. And there was another. I mean, it seemed like witch was a stand-in word for druid.
Yeah.
And so that was a little bit strange. Although it does not seem as though any of the magic classes are gender locked
No.
in any concrete way.
Which makes sense both, I don't see any reason why a magical system would be gender locked, but also with the way they treat gender in the rest of this book. So
Well, and maybe somebody in the comments can start a battle with me about this, but I would consider this to be a soft magic system. The rules are not hard and prescribed.
absolutely.
However, for my money, when you're doing a soft magic system, the balancing force for the nebulous nature of the rules is the sense of wonder. You use the creation of the sense of wonder in the reader balances out the uncertainty of the way the system works. And there's a trust that has to be instilled in the reader that you're not going to just make up new rules as you go and just give your character a new power every time a new situation shows up.
Right.
That's
Which
why
is basically what happened.
Yes. So for me, this is a failed soft magic system. It would be the equivalent. I mean, it's cliched out, but it's just a good example. That's why he's the king. Tolkien's magic system had many of these same elements. You kind of didn't really know how it worked or who could do what, but you didn't feel like every situation that came up, both the bad guys and the good guys just always pulled out the exact new tool that had never been mentioned to solve that problem. When that did happen, it felt novel. It felt like you were having information revealed to you. I never felt like I was being revealed information about the magic system. It always seemed like it was a overly convenient addition,
right,
as the narrative progressed.
And I mean, to sort of counterexample, or not counterexample, to reinforce your example, the scene in Fellowship of the Ring, where they're trying to get into Moria, I believe he explicitly tries an unlocking spell and it doesn't work. So he tries to use magic and it fails, and he finds out he just has to speak Elven at it.
Right, he just has to say friend.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an example where a soft magic system, they tried to introduce a new power, so to speak, and it didn't work because magic wasn't the key.
Right. In this case, it was lore.
Yeah.
Essentially, was the power that was needed, not just a new spell.
Right.
In the case of Witch King, particularly the expositors, I found was never clear what they could do.
Did I miss the part where they explained when he started being called the Witch King? Because I feel like it happened somewhere between the end of the beginning, the past the beginning, that chapter, and the present.
I don't recall exactly where that was described. I just assumed. I mean, she does give you some backstory into his lineage as a demon.
Right, but my impression was that the Witch King was something that he was called
by mortals.
By mortals, and the implication I got was that it was a result of his efforts in the fight against the hierarchy, and he helped corral the witches, who are kind of heavily implied to be this pseudo-anarchistic, there's no hierarchy, no organization. They just are the witches, and he was kind of able to corral that was my headcanon for how he became known as the Witch King.
And they communicate with ASL.
Yes. So just woke agendas all over.
Woke agendas everywhere. It's the Witch King.
Listen, we got transes, we got gays, we got
disabled. It's all there, baby.
Fucking pronouns.
yes, absolutely. I just wasn't digging the magic. It wasn't appealing to me, and Kai just never felt. And maybe this is a function of the fact that we've been reading so many of these urban fantasies where it's the badass chick archetype, but he just felt like a wet noodle. He always felt weak.
Yeah,
in pretty much every scenario, and his main power of being able to just drain people to death, it comes up, but it never. The narrative does not match up to the description of it. It never seems like it's actually that useful of a tool.
I mean, it's useful in exactly one situation where he uses it to drain the expositor. I mean, the only time. And yeah, the only other thing of note he had was his durability, his ability to just take damage and recover because of his demonic nature.
That's what I'm saying, is that ultimately a lot of the stuff that he does is I stand and get shot instead of someone else.
Uh huh.
Or, things like that that just didn't work for me as
Right.
centerpieces for combat scenes. And he talks very similarly to the badass chicks of Magic Bites or Deathmaker,
Mm-hmm.
but then he just gets beat up.
Yeah, I think that's probably why he came across as aloof to me, is because the narrator delivers those lines in a very flat way instead of like I would normally read those lines as more either I'm a badass bitch.
Well, and she did the thing again. This happened in another book we read where it was essentially he was saying like, I'm not a man, I'm the man. But it was
It's
the demon.
Yeah, it's in the fight. It's like the quote they used to sell the book or whatever. It's in there. It's like you're a demon. I'm the demon.
But not really.
No.
Uh,
Well, maybe that's why he's called. Maybe he's the demon because he's the Witch King because of his efforts during the war, which we didn't
which
see.
we didn't get. Yeah, it just wasn't as a system. It didn't work for me. It didn't have enough intrigue, and the combination of that with Kai being kind of a wet noodle of a character dragged it down.
It. So I was laboring the entire book under the impression that Kai was in search of his wife, which kind of gave him a reason for being there.
So you did a misread, and that went through your entire perception of the
Yeah. Rethinking now where he's just looking for the wife of his friend, his comrade,
Well, and we never really get a very good explanation of the heart pearls.
No.
We get like almost no closure on
It's
on that.
something that can be installed at will. It apparently gives people access to your psyche, your mind, without you having full control over that. Because there's a reason why Dahim doesn't have it. Because apparently he was tortured.
Well, no, Taran didn't have it because she was in a cell.
No, Taran did. Dahim didn't.
Taran did have a heart pearl,
Right.
but they couldn't access it because she was
She was in a
trapped.
cell, but Dahim didn't have a heart
Right.
pearl, because he was tortured, and he didn't want anyone having access to his mind like that again.
It was unclear.
Yeah.
But again, information about this great war and the battle scenes where Kai actually fights like a demon and earns his title, and
Yeah,
all of
authors-
that stuff would have been way better.
Just putting this out there, we're not actually tired of war stories. In fact, I could do with a few good books about like righteous rebellions and the good and the bad and the things that happen in those, instead of the things we seem to be coming across where it's just we got right up to the beginning of the rebellion and then we got the shitty stuff after. Where's that Noogity Center?
Well, there is, like Ursula Le Guin, for example, was pretty critical of combat porn in fantasy literature.
Sure. I understand completely, and I agree.
But
with
this
her.
is cheating.
Yeah.
You can't just say all of this stuff did happen. I'm not putting it on the page.
Right.
You have to write a story that does not need those things to be as good. That would be the true, to embody the ideals of the Le Guinian anti-war porn.
Right.
If you read the A Wizard of Earthsea and all of those books, you're going to find that you are just as engaged in the fantasy and the wonder, and yet there aren't any battle scenes, and descriptions of previous wars are very limited.
Yeah, and
this story stood on just imagine the porn, but I'm not going to write it.
Right. like, to be clear, I'm not saying we need more war porn or more battle porn. I agree with Le Guin in that. But I think we can definitely show a rebellion without war porn that is fun and engaging, and it doesn't seem like anyone but Le Guin wants to do that.
Well, I actually don't agree with Le Guin on this score. I think that if literature is to some degree to be a mirror that sort of, by showing a reflection of us, shows us the similarities to an imagined world and then also the differences, then, I mean, look at what's going on in our world right now. Like, we obviously, we're learning right now that lessons that we thought were learned concrete at the beginning of the 20th century were not learned.
Nope.
And in fact, in multiple cases right now, we're seeing perpetrations of very analogous atrocities and war crimes happening that are, I think, ripe for fantasists and writers of other genres to criticize, but also educate by showing.
Right.
And so
I guess I think there's a difference between showing combat and battle porn or war porn. And I think
Knight Errant was full of battle porn.
Yes.
It was gratuitous just for the sake of pure unvaluable titillation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
I would say Jordan did a pretty good job of doing battle scenes without battle porn, but that's because he sucks at writing battle.
You mean Robert Jordan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sanderson tried to do more of the battle porn, and that's part of the reason why there's the last battle chapter is longer than the entire first 2 or 3 Harry Potter books. But Jordan tended towards more. He tended not to do the big battle scenes, but he'd do duel scenes, and those were good, and those were not gratuitous. So I mean, there's a middle ground.
Yeah, there's a middle ground, and this novel is an example of where the backstory was really interesting, and the actual narrative was kind of not.
Yeah, I don't tend to like stories that are just court intrigue. I mean, they're fine, but if it's just
Political.
Yeah, that can get a little boring and a little.
I'm not even sure what you would call the genre. I guess political intrigue. I mean, I guess A Song of Ice and Fire would kind of fit into that category.
Kinda, but there's enough adventure and that kind of stuff that
it's wide enough in scope that it isn't reducible to that one mechanic. I guess I struggle to think of a well-known fantasy story where it is just straight up, this is a court intrigue.
Yeah. I think that would have been a more interesting way of telling this story than the story of... Because part of it is that they clearly travel...
No, it is a travelogue in that sense, but it is...
But I don't really get a sense of them traveling.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they go very far, and it reads just kind of like a diary. A relatively boring diary.
It reads like someone doing... If you remember the old text-based Let's Plays, back before sharing video content was easy.
It's like shitty Oregon Trail, but nobody can die from dysentery.
It's like a shitty Skyrim Let's Play where they don't even try to, connect things or make sense. They just fast travel from point to point. And so there's no continuity in where they go or whatever. They're just going where they need to go for the quest or what have you. And so that's kind of what this felt like. It's like they were fast traveling from point to point with no rhyme or continuity.
Compounded by the fact that the immortal blessed can literally fast travel.
Right.
They can just teleport in like Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Which, again, would have been cool. I'm imagining these battle scenes with all these demons draining people and the witches doing all kinds of crazy druidic magic, and then you have these blessed guys beaming in with their great whatever they called it, holy or blessed forged weapons, and
Yeah,
the
blessed
crossbows
blades or
that
whatever.
like uh, melt you down or whatever, or
Yeah.
all of that going on, mixed in with like the intrigue of the demon court and the conflict that they were having
Mm-hmm.
there, so on and so forth. And again, it's possible that all this happens in the second, third, whatever book in the
Yeah.
series, but again, we're at this crossroads where I'm not gonna know because you should have just led with that.
Yeah.
If you're a writer and you want to write a fantasy series, I feel like if you are not already published, then if you read a lot of the stuff we've been reading, you would think that the correct strategy would be save the really good stuff for the second, third, fourth book. And I just can't stress enough, I think that's fail. I do not think that is the way you should approach world creation. You should just lead with the best story that you can tell that has the most interesting components.
One of the biggest one of the best pieces of writing advice I ever heard was if you're going over a story, like you're writing your story, and this is not the most interesting day in your character's life, why are you telling this story and not that one?
Yeah, I feel like I've heard that somewhere before. I think
That's
I
a
think somebody famous said that
Yeah.
initially.
It's probably like the key to telling a good story is start by throwing your character down a well. Then when he starts getting out, throw rocks at him. At night, the wolves come. You know, that keep piling on shit.
Well, and not to make this a Tolkien podcast, but there's some variance here. Because I personally would make the argument that all of the information in sort of the legendarium information that he gives, I think those stories would have been better than the Lord of the Rings in narrative novel form. The
Potentially,
huge
yeah.
the huge battle
You're
where
talking about
Sauron
like
is
the Silmarillion and all that
yeah,
stuff.
well,
Yeah.
or even just the huge battle when I think the last alliance of elves and men is at the end of the first age. I think
Is
if I
that the
remember.
one?
That's the one they
where
show
they
us-
steal the ring.
where they cut the ring off of his
Yeah.
hand and
Yeah.
like all the stuff that's leading up to that and having
Yeah.
Sauron in his full-bodied form with his weapon knocking people all over. And,
Instead, Warner Brothers told it in a couple of shitty video games.
yeah, that did happen.
Yeah.
But I think that would have made a better novel. But there are a lot of people that would disagree because the Lord of the Rings proper is also a masterwork. And it is very interesting and has lots of really high quality stuff going on.
Right.
And so in that sense, I think it's closer to balance, even though for me personally, the backstory is more interesting. The problem comes in when you get something like, it's not fair to compare Martha Wells to Tolkien, but
No.
in this case, there's this huge disparity between.
Okay, let's compare a little bit better. Let's compare, say, let's compare Kai and the characters in Witch King to Roland and Manny in After the Revolution.
Well, but we made the same critique of that book.
True. Yeah. No, you're
I would
right.
definitely have rather read during the Revolution instead of after.
Yeah.
I think that would have been an awesome book, and especially even just in that case, reading what happened right after the Revolution and not whatever it is, 20, 50, I can't remember how many years
20,
later.
it's like 30 or 40 years. Because it's 2070-ish when the story starts. And I want to say the catalyst to the revolution was like 2040, something like
Okay.
that. So yeah, it's like 30 years after the revolution. Which, if we discussed in that how it feels like it was a lot longer ago than just 30 years. But
Because I think if Martha Wells had written the story that I just laid out of all these great battles and the demon intrigue and so on and so forth, and then she wrote this as the second book, people would have been like, what the fuck?
yeah,
And so if she follows this book with the backstory, I feel like that's another instance where you can only get away with it because you kind of knew that the book was going to get published before you wrote it.
yeah.
If you're somebody who's trying to break in, just write the fucking backstory.
There's a reason why the first Star Wars movie ends the way it does, but Episode 1 ends the way it does. And they have two very different endings. One ends in a way where, sorry, George, the movie didn't sell too well, so we're not making the next two. This is it. You just what. If episode
So wait,
one,
wait. Are you making the claim that Star Wars also falls into this category where the backstory? So like, i.e., let's not talk
no,
about
no,
if
no,
we
no.
enjoyed the films, but
I'm comparing it to the idea of Martha Wells was already an established author who knew she would get published.
oh, okay, right,
So she wrote a story, let's say she wrote a trilogy. And the first one's kind of weak, but she knows she's going to get the second and third published, so that doesn't matter. Uh, Whereas a new author, they need to make that first one solid. They need to make that first book good because they don't have a guaranteed second or third.
right.
Star Wars is the same way. Back in the 70s, first Star Wars movie, they didn't know it was going to be this massive cult hit, this massive, pop culture hit. So they made the first movie. The way it ends, that can be the end of the story. They've defeated the Empire. The rebellion is won. You can see that as a good ending. That's why they get the medals at the end. That's why that's the whole thing. Whereas episode one, how does that movie end?
Right.
On a cliffhanger with a bunch of threads to be picked up in the next movie because they had already started filming the next movie. They
Yeah.
knew that was going to happen.
Well, and to some degree, I do think that we're maybe realizing as we continue with this project that there is kind of a dearth of standalone fantasy and urban fantasy novels.
Well,
And
I actually brought this up to you early in this project where I was like, do we want to steer more towards standalone books? And we kind of realized that would leave our pickings very, very slim.
particularly for my picks,
Yeah.
for the fantasy,
For fantasy,
the more
yeah.
high fantasy driven stuff.
But even urban fantasy, like if you pull up any kind of top urban fantasy books of all time, it's like Dresden #1, Kate Daniels #1, The Hollows #1. It's these books that are either the first in a series or the best in a series.
And I mean, I have to admit, like, I'm also writing a fantasy novel that is meant to be at least a trilogy. So I can't, like, I'm not innocent here. I'm not. In fact, if anything, like, I'm trying desperately to help contribute to this problem. But it would be nice to see more of just these stories that are contained, so that you kind of know that you're getting whatever the best story is from the world that they created when you pick up that novel. And that is something that I think we're learning, or at least I'm learning, the more of these that we read, is that that doesn't seem to be the game that's being played by fantasy and urban fantasy writers. It much more seems to be this kind of we'll get there attitude. Slog through this first book or these first several books, and you're going to get this reward in the very long term. And that is disappointing in some ways, or at least it has been disappointing.
Yeah.
Based on the books that we have selected. So that would be something, if you as the listener can think of any books that we have not covered that are relatively recent, where the first book in a series is just an absolute slapper, by all means let us know, and we will take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, there are any number of books we could go back in history, but we try to keep it fairly recent. Both just because it's things people are interested in, and also because the older a book is, the more people have probably talked it to death.
Right.
You
Off the top of my head, Stephen Erickson's Gardens of the Moon, the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen decalogy. It's a 10 book.
Yeah.
I guess that's the word, I'm not sure. That one's an absolute slapper, as well as the first book in Roger Zelazny's Amber Chronicles. It's called Nine Princes in Amber. It's my favorite novel. It's, I think, one of the best novels ever written. And there's some variance in both of those series, I think, of the quality of the books that follow. Maybe some of them ascend to the level of good of the first novel, but there are some that are lesser.
Right.
But for me, those are two series that have stuck with me all of these years, because that first introduction was so good that it didn't matter to me as much if book 3 wasn't my favorite.
Right.
Whereas and maybe it's partially an age thing too and a time limitation thing, but if I read the first book and it's like this, where I came into today thinking I was going to be in the positive, that I kind of enjoyed it, because I felt like I was enjoying it as I read it, but as we pick it apart,
Well, I mean, we had the exact same thing last week where I thought I enjoyed Love and for Love and Magic.
well, but I convinced you.
Yeah, yeah.
In this case, I sort of
you convinced yourself.
I convinced myself. But in these cases, I'm not going to read more of the series if that first book doesn't pull me in. and that seems to be a thing that's happening to us kind of frequently. I mean, even with that Age of Ash, it seemed like even in that case, I don't know that there really was much of a backstory that was better than the story itself, but it just didn't pull me in enough that I was like, I want to read 2 or 3 more of these.
Right. Yeah, Age of Ash, that one. I guess I didn't realize it was part of a series, so when it ended the way it did, I was just like, oh.
It's a trilogy.
Yeah.
So, turning back to this book, and I guess sort of like beginning to wind down, maybe the worst book that we've read in terms of the names. The names were crazy.
I just stopped paying attention to the names at some point. I was like, oh, new character? Cool. Was it going to be important? Probably not. Or maybe, who knows?
One, there were so many of them that sounded the same.
Yeah. And especially, there was Bashasur, and then...
Bashasur. Is that how he said it?
Yes. How was it spelled? I need to find and retweet that thing I sent you a while ago of the reader of books and listener of audio.
Well, there was Bashat. The dramatis persona is not in alphabetical order.
Of course not.
So it's from the past. Are you talking about Bashaza Callis? Bashaza Callis?
I think so.
The prince heir
Yep.
of Benaeus Arik, sent to the summer halls as a hostage for his city's...
Beniric? I gotta see how this shit is spelled. Hang on. Let me...
No, it's Benaeus. Benais hyphen Arik.
Beniric. That's how it's pronounced.
No.
Yes.
What's the hyphen for?
I don't know. The hyphen is the fantasy fucking apostrophe. What are you talking about?
No, there should be a pause.
Yeah.
That's what you would use that for. At least that's the way that I would use it.
I don't know. Maybe it's part of the backstory that was not filled in, is why it's called Beniric.
Like if I wrote Melort, Mellort, MEL hyphen ORT, Melort.
Right.
That's what it's for, as far as I understand it.
I would normally agree with you, but it's pronounced... The narrator.
Yeah, the narrator did it. As far as I know, I assume that they have at least, some kind of a recorded conversation with the author, where, in this case Martha Wells would pronounce the names the way that she wanted them to appear. And jump in the comments if you had the same horror story. When I was listening to the Audible versions of Patrick Rothfuss's novels, The Name of the Wind, and then the second one, I believe, was The Wise Man's Fear, there was one character where the name was pronounced one way in the first book, and then he pronounces it a different way in the second book. And I could not fucking handle it. It literally ruined the experience for me.
Was it the same narrator both times?
I believe it was.
Wow.
And so you wonder, did he fuck up the first time or the second time?
Yeah.
Or did Rothfuss just change his mind, or what happened behind the scenes to make that the case? But, as far as the names go, you have Cantinos, Arnefa. How did he pronounce that one?
Arnefa.
Arnefa.
Yeah.
So again, the hyphen means nothing.
Nothing.
And
dude, the hyphen, the apostrophe, these are fantasy signifiers of weird names that you just ignore the English pronunciation.
No, I can't live like that. Hierarch's voice, Rahakana Talaminis.
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay, that's how he said that.
Yeah.
Okay. See if there's any other ones that are. And then there was Menless, Sefrizis. Sefrizis. It says Sefrizis and Kinlot, lords of the court of Niantoric. Niantoric.
Oh. Yeah. I don't remember how that was pronounced, but now I remember. The Neantric are the ones who are the people who kidnapped
Yeah.
Kai and
Well, it was weird that there were so many difficult to read names, and then just grandma,
yeah.
just straight up grandma, and yeah, I mean, I guess we don't need to belabor that anymore. The names, they were weird enough, and sounded similar enough that I stopped. It got to a point where I was just like, okay, character name.
Mm-hmm. And especially since you have names like Kai, which is a perfectly fine name.
Well, and of course, he had a much longer, more difficult to pronounce version.
Kyesteron?
Yeah.
Yeah, the more I think about this book, the more I think that just an exploration of the demons and their culture and the Seretti would have been a more interesting book for a story that ultimately ended up being like almost a slice of life type story. I mean, obviously, yes, it's an adventure story. It has those elements, but like as far as the impact on the world, unless we take the sort of implication that like Kai is going to take a greater role in the Rising World in subsequent books, and so that's going to have a change on the world, but like we don't know what because we're told this Rising World Empire was intended to be a coalition, and that because of Kai's outmaneuvering of the Neanterics, that it's no longer an empire, it's a coalition. But what does that mean? You know, what did it mean when it was an empire? What does it mean now that it's back to being a coalition? You know, there definitely seemed to be. This is why I kind of wanted to talk about politics, and you said there wasn't really a through line, and I can kind of agree with that, because there definitely is. There seems to be a certain level of pseudo-anarchist sentiment, because the enemy is the hierarchy, which I believe this is the second book.
No, this is woke witch.
Yeah, but this is the second book where the enemy was just the hierarchy. Because Way of Kings, it was also the hierocracy. Remember? So this is the second time where the enemy is just the hierarchy. I mean, not literally the concept, but the concept of hierarchy. And you've got the witches, who are pretty much the good guys.
Yeah, as close to that as we get.
And they are
certainly,
explicitly anarchist.
Yeah.
I mean, without obviously using the word, but, you know, their organization would make... how has every anarchist theorist fled my brain now?
They're all gone.
Kropotkin.
There you go. You found one.
Yeah, would make Kropotkin weep. Then you've got this Rising World, which is sort of implied to be, again, the remnants of the factions and states and nations and cultures.
Yeah, the disjointed remnants of the genocide of the hierarch.
Right.
The hierarchy order.
Yeah.
Coming together and rising up to destroy the apparatus of oppression.
Right.
Yeah, very cool, based.
And again, there's a very interesting story in how that structure can be subverted by Benairic or whomever it was that created this empire out of it.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story too. It's not in this book.
Nope, we don't get that story. Instead, we're going to ride on a boat that doesn't know it's a boat.
Yeah.
And I let's move into sort of our final comments here. And the last main thing I will say is, when I went into this thinking I was about to get a pirate romance, and it opened up and they were trapped, and there was a cool battle scene, and he's draining people, and and he frees the girl, and there's this tension of like, are they just gonna kill her too? You don't know. Are these like corsairs? Like maybe they kind of are good guys, but they might also just be, do acts of evil in the world as well. Are they gonna now steal a pirate ship and they're gonna go searching for the gold?
I was hoping it would be a little more morally gray, because typically draining life force like that is not the act of a good character. No comment on whether it can be good or whatever. I'm saying typically it's used as a, if you got someone draining life, that's not the good guy.
Right.
But
those first 2 chapters, I was hype.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the past, and then it's just, I'm in a tent, and then me and my friend go out into the river, and I don't know, a bear or something like pops out and just murders him.
Yeah.
And then I was sad, and then I think I sent you a message on Facebook, and I was like, yeah, I was really into this, but then I got bored.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. I was happy to see that at least it wasn't, you got those first 2 chapters and then the entire book was the past. But who's to say if ultimately the sort of weaving together of those 2 narratives ended up, being better than what it would have been if it was just, the first 2 chapters were a prologue and there was the novel, and then you got a little bit more at the end. I don't know, but I guess my final word is I don't regret reading it, but it's not something that I wouldn't say you need to like rush out and get a hold of a copy of this so that you don't miss the high level anarchist theory that's on display.
Right. So we've been using the Better or Worse than Knight Errant, but I think For Love of Magic supplanted that as the worst book we've done so far. So Better or Worse than For Love of Magic.
For Love of Magic was really zany. And
it was at least entertaining, even if it was...
It was definitely, there were some entertaining parts, although, again, the dialogue in that book was so bad. It really bothered me. How often the main character was just overtly like, I'm a badass.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm going to do the following thing.
Right.
Yes, I think it was better. I think this is better than that. The writing is solid throughout. The dialogue is mostly believable. There were only a few of those really weird bravado, I'm the demon moments. I think the writing was better. It is a complicated narrative, particularly with the cast of characters. I just had a lot of problems with, in post, as we discussed it here, with getting it, I guess I'm just entrenched in the problem of the backstory being so interesting and the main story being, here we go in the boat.
Yeah. Not a terrible book, but not one I'd recommend to anyone.
So what are we reading next time?
Pure Power by Nicholas Wood Smith. It's the first in the Cindy Giles trilogy, I think. And I will actually be reading this one on Kindle because there isn't an audiobook for it and there isn't one out anytime soon.
Okay, so your first pick, I think, where it does not have an Audible. I think I picked one that did not.
Didn't yet, and I think it's going to be out here soon.
No, I think previously I did. There was one book I picked where you did have to read the text. I can't remember which one that was, though.
Remember, but it doesn't matter.
No.
But, yeah, so it's an urban fantasy book about a doctor.
Yes, so that was what we talked about before, is that maybe we are going to get, for me, the first urban fantasy book I can just get behind, because it does not include romanticizing the police force.
Yeah, we had that discussion, how many urban fantasy books have a protagonist who is either a cop, a detective, or a bounty hunter.
I would be very happy to read an urban fantasy that did not include that, at least as the main underpinning of the narrative. It would be cool to, I'm in. Let's do the urban fantasy doctor story.
Hell yeah.
All right, well, hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at Staff Trenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.